So it is 7:05. Thank you all so much for coming tonight to the MFA student reading. This will feature 4 of the first years. Will be Mary Dwyer, myself, Jillian Fantin, Naima Msechu, and Phillip Spinella. And I'm going to kick things off tonight by introducing our very first reader. Proudly hailing from the Jersey Shore, Mary Dwyer graduated from the College of New Jersey in 2013 and is a first-year poetry candidate in the MFA program. Her poetry finds itself in conversation with Srikanth Reddy and Cynthia Cruz and the traditions of nursery rhymes and folk tales, while also standing deeply rooted in her own personal poetics and inspirations. A Mary Dwyer poem is an experience. It's like wading through an astonishingly thick swamp of time itself, painstakingly brushing away the sand from a most exciting artifact, and witnessing her, and I quote, deep chatter of reconstructed faces all at once. Bodies morph, bees swarm, time itself spins on the rota fortunae. And Mary's speakers set the pace, leading her readers through the unfamiliar like Virgil and Beatrice lead Dante. And we eagerly follow these guides through her meticulously crafted worlds that are both timeless and full of time. I cannot help but revel in her ability to pair the dreamlike with the archaic, the surreal with the mundane, the religious with the secular. And Mary melds her themes and language into a fantastically cohesive, ever-morphing body of work. These lines from Mary Dwyer's poem Sleepwalk best explain her use and view of language. Consonants crack like ancient mirror shards. Syllabic fractals splinter in the wind. As institutional, religious, and societal panopticism enacts violence upon vulnerable subjects, those bodies, beings, and eventually language itself become fractured, cracked, and fragmented. In her ekphrastic sequence Papissa Joanna, for instance, Mary bears poetic witness to the violence performed against Pope Joan for transgressing classical boundaries as a woman in the medieval Catholic tradition. And in Filium Jesus, Mary's sensory language and linguistic invention creates visceral scenes of memory as a speaker searches for a lost brother. First time I tasted death, it was your eyes. Dream milk dribbled in the hall, and I could have told you of Nepenthe's black, to name a few. Using her powers of language, invention, and world building, Mary's poetry excavates grief and trauma, and she does so in a deeply empathetic way. Even as she moves her speakers, bodies, and worlds in and out of time and in and out of land, water, and air, her poems all remain grounded in the familiarity of shared human experiences. Her epistolary series, Dear Sabina, for instance, invites the reader into intimate correspondence from an unnamed writer to the mysterious Sabina. Mary maintains the duality of relational privacy and reader proximity by employing her careful empathy. She allows the writer to expose private details, such as in the lines, I am old and bladder pinching, my breasts an untouched dactyl, while refusing to ignore how their private emotional torment is just that, private. In Nomine Patris is another powerful sequence exploring paternal loss as the speaker repetitively croaks in grief, so much so that witnesses assume that grief was new. Amidst all of this personal and collective grief, Mary builds a complex world of dreams, stars, and fluxing bodies for her speaker's grief to safely inhabit, allowing for the exploration of loss to occur within a carefully constructed surreal universe. Ultimately, Mary Dwyer's poetics root out how trauma fragments language, and her poetry must simply be experienced. I am excited for everybody to hear her words tonight, so please join me in warmly welcoming Mary Dwyer.
Thank you, Jillian. I don't know if it can get more surreal than the Jersey Shore itself, but I certainly try. So here's my first poem, In Nomine Patris. In the end, the finch plucked our last muscled pearls from between the headstones. Those tongue-flicked tones raised to crush our torsos to muted pallets of grief. Where he goes, we slope, groundward and leaking, limbs aflutter to a phantom dirge as wrinkled choirs retreat to an empty sacristy waiting in the wings above. Fade, fade the pallid drone of earthly mope, In this dark, we cave. We beat the walls, fist over flowers, stuff the frayed shawl, the tipped cup of his animal drunk catches metal from our mouths. Sidewise, we curl, we laugh. In puddles, pick bones unwanted by thieves. By candles in circles, we tight-lip, we creep, a pantomime petting of dentures and dimes, pleated watches, and pocket. Yes, let us kiss the baldest of heads before we gag the throat that threats to burble from spine to the tips of our time-stamped tongues. When we learned to speak, it was wash it, dry it, put it away. When we learned to drive, it was foot to pedal, eyes to rear view, knuckle to teeth. When we learned to move on, it was he who works not, shall not eat. At our weak thumbs, the hammers and nails, nothing sticks, nothing weeps. Reduction, a therapeutic model. Alluvial sea slugs, the scarcity bug. I'm hit in the paunch on a neighborhood cruise. Bruise this. I dim wit, I dust house, I cut cable cortex to soften the shine. Pulse thumbs on vertebrae, plump out the junk data. Don't forget the chemex papers. Don't forget the root chakra. Don't forget Snapchat. My syllable soup is swarming pain. Have you heard of my atrophied root chakra? Of my darlings raised by liver-shod souls, by belt lashes, by spine blades? A dish drop, a comma splice, a tender temple sliced and lice-ridden neck nape wrenched by scrub-conscious, shoe-polished, bud-lightened hands. Hear this moan muffled by moist pillow preaching. Hear the clipping of preened buds, the quiet of oozing stem. Sleep locked. A peripheral burble of patchworked faces. Consonants crack like ancient mirror shards, split from chapped lips, syllabic fractals splinter in the wind. Side-propped I roll, wall trace glyphs as my bald pate aches with half-remembered writhings. Left hand against musked prickles, two snakes shining each other's scales. The ciphers unrelent, pale or blush, limp or stiff, flesh or flying, all prod at the flutter between eyelids and lashes. Nursery babes loom in blue-washed rooms. I plead and shrink into eggs in my palms, into ashes. My mother, as a spider, once again teaches me how to weave a web between two bottle mouths at a barbecue, between two books on Al-Anon and Shakespeare. Sheet twisting the thought. How has the dirt treated her for all these years? Is it true what the warblers cheep of Varanasi? Do henna'd palms perpetually cremate their loves on the banks of the Ganges? Once I heard a swallow's night bellow, chorus and trembling as the girl child when I wrapped her white in cotton sheets. Plump folds glowed as I shushed and kissed the knuckle dimples in the moons of her fists. Now I only this. Distant cradles sail together upstream, so many rocking ships. Queen bee, hard on the flip, body strapped to a groove in the blip light, fat belly pinched and dunked, the plucked Venus of Willendorf lies, wined and beached, lulled into static grinning slumber, her limbs bruised by leeches, her valleys pitted and tilled, her clams shucked before her children can eat. She hacks relentless milk, galactic specks from some sin. It is the liquefaction of her bones, her spine. It is the exact same shade as her Hungry Jack mashed potatoes and her evening greetings every day since you came. Night bee. Thumbs rough on epiglottis, rubbed the consonants down to squirming nubs, each hymn coughed out in shuddering pieces, seeped cobalt into yawp-stained sheets. Stitched buttons of my teeth, threaded gear grind to incisor, bass string to canine, black keys to each crown. No civil sound could be heard for miles as you plucked my strings, your eyes each their own distinct growl. Light thee, a fat undercooked egg yolk sprinkled with wet hot ash, residual double helixes sticking dermal rust, the imprint of your lips hard elite, bitumen within expanding with the day like a muscle. Search for soft pockets of guttural sound, stamp my ear against bloat gut walls, bury my face in your feathered chest full of tar, hope to go blind. Canto. Long ago, milk spilled concentric on the floor. It was me, the snake plant, the clabbered cape, your sagging pants a dime bag out the door, your skin's gray vapor thick in the wind's wake. I said, brother, when your kingdom comes ashore, I'll be waiting rusted tables at the break. I could have told you of Nepenthe's black. I could have told you then your ship would crack. Frater in phases. 1, drink your nap milk. Sleep neath gull's wings spilled. I'll tuck you snugly to moon punks, to Loch Ness, the world's tallest ride. If you had a buried treasure, where would you hide? 2, I had always hoped you'd share that something sacred, that snorty saccharin, that drip that sips right down to the root. But we supped on flies on Independence Day, Neptune pastoral with voices on mute. 3, waxing gibbous, waning gibbous, there are shades of brother, peripheral verb scanning coastal dark sides, many round swells of squirrely tar. See, my ebullient face laid to rest in the yard. 4, oh foam churn, oh grace dive, oh light through the curtains, come, I make caves, we'll nest up, we'll couchwise, 2 pupa, we'll wiggle, cocoon, a new giggle, lock fingers, we'll linger, we'll whisper and shrive. 5, you rake, you royal, you dirtbag pallbearer, you slaked Calypso to algae sap, see how she drips in the soup? Oh my pumpkin, I swaddle, I'm singing you arias, I wait at the end stage on Wavesick alone. Share my screen for this one. Papisa Joanna. And pulse the belly of her cell, a ticking point that reams at the root. We're zeroed in here. See the steam of Papisa Joanna sailing on haloed bark, a papal throne float. One day she'll mime cryptside, but for now she eats her breakfast, a peptide soup robed in red pessary stones, her crown gild a sorry slick of testicular pomp. Oh salve, the sticks in our hands, Joanna. See the cross strip of lech and mortar from our hairs. She whips spun honey and rolls it flat on our backs, the better to steal us with, to seal the deal of solitary chamber. But hum goes a bee in the tabby. Ring, ting, ting, singeing salvage songs from the cupboard, and lipids square off into the corners, wiggle through all that heat. They've mistaken bone for hog swallow and are eating away all her density, masses of God and gallstones. Oh, see her, Papisa, our smear papped on the wall. Joanna, a thumbprint on the sour cloud beyond window's helm as the mad friar tiptoes round edges, stippling her hip points lost traces to uncloaked wood, the sneak. Such chartreuse velvet to pet, such viscous stars in her wake. There once was a bee in the steeple. It bopped from wall to wall, unaccustomed to all that conical energy and aloneness. It rubbed its little fins together on a leash, tried daily to leap from this, the highest window of Joanna's greatest hat, the greatest plainchant hits streaming from Cardinal's lips all morning, ambient preens of weeds and the cornerstones. Peep, 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 the garden boys ripple across plains, dandelion and chickweed rolling in the raspberries, Fuzzy pats of yellow-black hum their heads, lapping dreams of lush covens before the dustbin flames. Staunch the practicalities for a moment. Here we see a small man emerge from her gold-robed lap, a whistle picking its wet way out the teeth. In such mosaics, we stack one ache atop the next. A cerulean jowl awaits its sidelong chance to speak. Step up, Madonna, you madge of the drizzle. What waits at the edge of your stees is a map to the flank decks with their peg legs, their dreams, and their lung stodge. All that clipped smog breath huffs its way round the sails, spinning dragons of each mast. Oh, to wander in the mind through cervix cramp. He comes out fully formed and reaching, fists poised to grab at a bite of sweetmeats, minced morsels, little bees and applesauce of the plains. In pallor, she's shipwrecked, barnacles clenching her undersides, no blip for rest, a brooch at the throat, pinning pearls to choke weeds, they peek out the uvula and tamp down its bloat whale. What's hovering is a heartbeat. What's hovering is the sick of fish spilling out a cornucopia of sleep and found in our dream theater. Try we to speckle Joanna on the screen, close the mink furs of our eyes to kiss her nipples edged in angels. Psalms trickle down her wrists and sprinkle over our heads in the upholstered seats. A diadem rolls along the aisles. Who set fire to the film reels and left us with all this pain? This is my last one. It's Altar to Virgin Mary. Throat-backed an improbable aloneness. Fizz clinking in on all sides of ye highball glass, I steep here like a bitter. He wakes on toe tip and spins out on an ache of excess bilirubin, my ballerina well-fed and nervous. Things are raking vaseward. A still life sits on a shelf, horns like heady kneecaps and the oblong stone atop Maria's head. A Semitic-tongued moon sits on a cistern and simmers the fate of his mystery child, Mom's feet cloaked as they must be by blush worry folds steepled into rose puckers at her brow. And my peepholes are stuffed with loose strife, my eyelids bend to the wheel, flamed, two jaundice puffs, breathing blobfish, combustible with pressure. Lash line aches right by the ball, a lump in there, a bee trying to hatch. Oh, little eggy wiggle, you itch. Come out now. Isn't it almost spring? Tunneled, a seed of rose hibiscus waits for the mucus to dissolve and coronas to burn. Little bread and butterflies kiss the tulips, and the sun is like a toy balloon. One day, I'll be the veteran in paradise. One day, I'll be a man who can't sleep and talks to strangers. Thank you.
That was incredible. Wow. Okay, it's my turn to introduce Naima. I'm still reeling. Okay. When Naima and I first met at Notre Dame, we bonded over our love for Julio Cortázar and Cesar Aira and Helen Oyeyemi, and soon Leonora Carrington, Catherine Davis, and so many others. Naima channels these writers' command of the fantastic, the speculative, and the ghostly, but pushes these tools one step further to also speak to the human. Her work ranges from the explicitly speculative, ghosts hovering over grieving lovers and astronauts falling into cacti, to the emotionally speculative, fantasy as projected upon the world by a young girl convinced her cherry earrings have the power to blow up her problems. The absurd and the fantastic is never tacked on in Naima's stories, never even really the point of them. What makes her writing so strong is her fascination with the way humans cling to imaginative concepts as tools for processing grief, trauma, loneliness, pain. Her characters speak frankly to one another, they try to connect, but are all impeded by visions of whales or dead loved ones haunting corners, ghosts behind kitchen tables, or the fact that they can only speak in binary. What I know of Naima's life is that it's one textured by both the beautiful and the absurd, a life that reflects in her fiction. Her father is a painter from Germany, where Naima and her family relocated from when Naima was 5. She moved back under undergrad, working steadily on her fiction as she took jobs as an archiving assistant for an eccentric communist and selling luxury creams and bath supplies to bourgeois women, jobs that strike me more as rich premises for her short stories than real life. Throughout it all, she has maintained a commitment to art and a connection with the German literary scene, and will be reading virtually at the LIX reading series in Munich soon. Finally, I would be remiss not to mention that Naima is also a deep, dedicated reader and a wonderful friend. I feel lucky to be in her cohort. Naima's work has not gone unnoticed in the literary world, and she's accumulated an impressive list of honors and awards for her writing. She graduated from Brown University with a BA in Literary Arts in 2017, and her writing has appeared in Thin Noon, Wig Leaf, the Master's Review Volume 8, curated by Kate Bernheimer, and is forthcoming from the Minnesota Review. Two of her stories have received honorable mentions from Glimmer Train, and her story Other Whale was named a contest semifinalist for American Short Fiction's Halifax Ranch Fiction Prize, and a contest finalist for Arkansas International's Emerging Writer Prize, judged by Deb Olin Unferth within the last year. Please join me in welcoming Naima tonight.
Thank you so much, Austin. That was lovely. And yeah, thank you all for being here. It's a really weird time, but I feel like events like this make it a lot more bearable and nice even. So that's good. I'm excited to be here, or in my room as always, but reading here. And I'm jealous of poets for getting to read like complete pieces in readings, and most of the things that I read are usually too long to fit into a reading window, but I decided I would start with a piece of flash fiction, and then I'll read, so I can read like a full thing, and then I'll read from a longer piece as well. So I'll start with a short piece called Diners. Diners. Under a cobalt sky sits a diner. The diner is never full and never empty. Inside is a man who holds forth about dinosaurs, who both mourns their death and proclaims his plans for a rehabilitation center a la Jurassic Park. He lives in the present when they are dead, in the past when they died their dramatic deaths, and in the future when they could be revived, and he wants all the other diners to know it. Often there is a woman who orders bottomless black coffee and then flags down one of the two waitresses about 3 times an hour, solely to subject them to incendiary political opinions and see what kind of response bounces back. A sadistic yet arguably scientific echolocation. Every Tuesday around noon, there are 2 women with matching ankle-length earrings, eating blueberry pancakes and arguing in whispers. They don't look anything alike, but it is clear to everyone who sees them that they're related, either sisters or twins with nothing but their jewelry in common. There is an old basset hound, because of course there is an old basset hound. And there are a good few unremarkable people with at least one remarkable thing up their sleeves. Under the diner, more diners. In dense, rich earth made fertile by sandwich wrappers, dish soap, and coffee grounds, they're scattered like seeds, sprouted. A diner can be anything, it just has to feed you. There's a diner for online shoppers where goods are delivered by digging drones, and the agreement is that the item is never what was ordered, but a similar item the drones prefer. It's always packed because people are generally satisfied as long as they don't feel empty-handed. Another diner serves an otherworldly music that makes guests think they're deep inside an unknown planet. There's a diner that's all sense all the time, and guests wear goldfish bowls on their heads to isolate the one they ordered, making it a room filled with sniffing, woozy astronauts. One of the diners serves only printed literature, but guests are pleased to find that's edible too. Yet another diner is dedicated to lights, fairy lights, bare light bulbs, office fluorescents, chandeliers, and so on. And there's a strict nudity policy because it is so hot and bright that guests can and should tan, flocking like giant moths. Nearby is a diner brimming with potted plants. They vary in size from tiny seedlings to big-leafed tropical plants, to chrysanthemums, to crawling vines, to orchids in furious bloom. This location is reserved for insects, mostly for bees who have had enough of the world above. A little deeper is a diner where everything is underwater. Mammals are only allowed in on Thursdays. At the deepest point, there's a diner with dinosaurs, but the dino man from above ground is too busy time traveling to discover it. And under the diner is simply the earth. It's the stuff that's always been there and the stuff that humans haven't tried to convert to real estate yet. The bees who have had enough created tunnels down there years ago, a waxy warren they visit when they want to feel the ambivalent, continual warmth of something no living thing truly understands. And then I will read the first couple of scenes from my short story, Other Whale. Other Whale. The astronaut, when he landed in a cactus. Mona was busy amplifying whale sounds through the rainwater pipe in the front yard. That was the way her week was going, whales everywhere and nowhere at once. And then the astronaut, in one place, namely skewered onto a saguaro in the shrubby front yard. Mona told herself she didn't have time for this. She didn't have time for her clingy, aging uncle, and she didn't have time for this gentleman who had parachuted so ungracefully onto her property. It was Arizona. She could shoot him. She didn't have a gun. She wasn't the kind of person to own a gun, but she informed him about the possibility. The astronaut straightened his spacesuit and pulled a cactus spine out of his chin. I'd rather you didn't, he said. I've had a long trip. Mona considered him for a second. She wasn't sure if she believed him. Do you like better than sex cake? She asked, shielding her eyes from the midday. Is that a trick question? The astronaut asked. Maybe, Mona said, though she hadn't meant it to be. Do you want some? The astronaut did. He kept his suit on while eating the better than sex cake, and then he took his suit off while they tested if its caramel and chocolate and toffee blend was better than sex. It was in this case, but Mona wasn't sure if that was because the sex was bad or because of the saguaro spines scattered across his body. It just wasn't her type of kink. He fell asleep shortly afterward and slept for the rest of the weekend, limbs stretched out on her waterbed like a spindly satellite. For her, it started with the upright bass and the cello. It started with their curved bodies, their roundness, their full-bodied sound in the crowded room with its lambent candlelight. It was abstract and Mona didn't understand it. She was fairly sure she didn't have to, yet she was trying to, and that was likely the problem. After a while, though, the ebb and flow under her thoughts knew where it came from. Whales. Two whales, wooden, echoes of each other, Baroque shapes as unnecessarily fundamental as chewing gum when she needed to concentrate, as sprinkles on soft-serve ice cream from the diner near her uncle's place. The sound would come through no matter what, would fill the space even without the curlicues on the side, the swirl at the very top. Definitely whale sounds. The whole bar subaquatic, and she sipping a blue moon and swaying as though she was down there. When Mona drove anywhere, her eyes were either trained on the road or on the note she had taped to the center of her steering wheel. You need one problem, not nets and plastic, choose one. This was good advice, maybe not for driving, but for almost everything else. Her uncle's neighbor had taped it to his door once, and Mona had taken it off before her uncle could see it. You could say what you wanted about the neighbor, and Mona's uncle had a lot to say, but she had a point. Mona's uncle had built a greenhouse/animal rehabilitation center out of plastic tarps, netting, duct tape, and fisherman's rope in his dusty backyard. The structure's functionality was purely aspirational. So far, all it housed were a few ambivalent cacti, a thoroughly deceased basil plant, and the occasional intrepid tarantula. Her uncle, need anyone state the obvious, was senile. This wasn't a problem for Mona. She had a lot of respect for people who lived long enough to show signs of wear and tear. What bothered her was a trait her uncle had displayed all along, one she wished had been eroded along with his appetite and capacity for coherent speech, his clinginess. As soon as Mona's father died, her uncle had decided the two of them needed to see each other more often. It didn't seem to matter that, until then, their paths had only crossed on Christmas and the 4th. Her father had visited her uncle once a week before he fell ill, and it seemed a substitution needed to be made. At first, she thought his interest in seeing her might be for her benefit, but she soon realized this was not the case. Back when he still spoke in words, he would ask her to tell stories of her father from when she was growing up. When he began speaking in zeros and ones, he made it clear the same was still implied. Mona was fairly sure it had started out as a social experiment, that he was teasing her or commenting on the rise of digital technology, or maybe passively aggressively telling her to stop checking her phone in the middle of telling a story about her 12th birthday. After 3 years, she was convinced it was something he could no longer control. His unwavering use of his personal binary code was similar to the way she'd started referring to things as the cat's pajamas as a joke because her condescending coworker said it often, and then found that she had gradually adopted it into her speech patterns, comparing the best of everything to feline sleepwear without a trace of irony. She had tried translating his binary code on her phone at first, but had found that it didn't match up with the official system. Now, her translations were mostly intuitive and contextual, and sometimes plain guesswork. 0011111001, Mona's uncle would say, and Mona would roll out the story about how her dad accidentally brooded a calcified piece of gum into a gooey disaster at the DMV. The gum trail followed him all to the counter. He had a bubblicious tail, Mona would say, and her uncle would laugh in bursts, 0110, and Mona would daydream about laying out all her problems next to each other, about choosing one problem and having that be the only one. The astronaut opted to put his spacesuit back on when he finally awoke on Sunday. Never mind that the June sun was hot or that the saguaro had ripped it in places. Mona wasn't sure if he dressed out of modesty or habit. Modesty wouldn't have made much sense. She had already seen all of him, observed the way his ruddy face, neck, and hands contrasted with the milky white of the rest of his body. She found this comforting, just as she had been reassured by her Googled discovery that blue whales had yellowish underbellies because of the tiny microorganisms housed there. No one could be only one thing, even if they were named for it. He found her on the front porch and sat down in the wicker chair beside her. He had left his helmet inside. She pictured it where she had seen it last, sitting on her nightstand like an empty globe. It's good to be back, the astronaut said. Mona took the bait. Where were you before? The moon. And how was that? Quiet, the astronaut said. I forgot how to talk up there. You know who's really good at talking? Mona asked, turning to face him. His suit looked pearly in the light emanating from the bulb hanging above their heads. His exposed skin was red as a blood moon. Whales. If you're talking decibels, they're louder than a jet engine, but underwater, you know. Want to hear? She got up before he could answer and turned on the CD player at the edge of the porch. Deep moans started streaming out of its speakers. Not sexual, otherworldly, underworldly, Mona thought. She considered turning the volume down for the neighbor's sake, then didn't. The way she saw it, they should be glad she had decided against using the rainwater pipe to broadcast the calls after dark. For a few minutes, they sat and listened. Some tracks were blue whale calls edited to play in succession, though the sounds had been emitted separately, and some were recorded song. The sounds had been sped up to make them audible to human ears, and Mona wished for the upteenth time that the CD had included some sort of translation. Its back cover mentioned that, while the precise function of blue whale song was still being researched, it was known that only males sang, only males projected patterned calls. Blue whales likely called and sang for all sorts of reasons, to attract mates, to navigate through the ocean, to warn others about danger, and so on. The low moans and hums they were hearing now could mean, I want to love you, or I don't know where I'm going, or stay away, stay away, stay away. Mona had no idea which, but she envied the whales for their ability to say it so clearly to those who could understand. Mona worked as a hairdresser at a failing hair salon. Her mother had worked there too, back when business was better. On good days, she was able to see the humor in it, a business that catered to something everyone had and could not stop from growing should have been set up for success. The problem was that the salon was not modern, and all the regulars who could care less were either dying off or being forced to move away by rising rent prices. Though Mona knew she could get a job at a different salon, she felt it was her duty to stay until the last regular stopped coming. They had such good stories, the regulars. After the small talk was taken care of and the real work of cutting layers or reviving highlights began, the worthwhile material rolled in like a high tide. Mona learned about people she had never met and had no desire to. Sometimes she pocketed a story and recycled it for her uncle. How was he to know it hadn't been his brother who had accidentally dropped his wife's urn while sick with food poisoning? When the session was over, the conversation and her responsibility for the person she was helping ended. Her only duty was to tend to her client's hair, its keratin abundance like a mouthful of baleen. Don't take their stories home with you, her mother had warned her often in the years they had worked together. You're not their mama. That, Mona had realized after her mother's death, had initially been her mistake. Her favorite childhood memories of time spent with her mother were those in which she was French braiding Mona's hair or twisting it into an updo fit for a senior prom, while Mona talked about anything that came to mind. For her, tending to the body was inextricably linked to storytelling. Only gradually had she learned to be selective in choosing when to take her work home. Her best friend Jules had started out as one of her clients. She wanted tricolored highlights, and those took time, but she had torpedoed right in a small talk. My son died today, she said. Mona almost dropped the bottle of shampoo she was holding. 8 years ago, I mean, said Jules, but today. I'm sorry. You're not, Jules said. You don't even know me. Today just sucks and he's all I'm thinking about anyway, so I figured I'd mention it since neither of us actually went to talk about Thanksgiving last week. Mona smiled and mentally discarded the question about turkey stuffing she'd been poised to ask. See, I knew it. We don't have to talk about my son anymore. I just wanted to mention him, Daniel. Since then, though, they talked a lot about Daniel. Daniel on a kindergarten field trip to an apple orchard. Daniel learning to read with a book about bats. Daniel looking pale in his coffin after the truck had hit him in his last month of first grade. When she had visited Jules' house for the first time, the photos of him hadn't matched what she'd imagined. Daniel was smaller than the way Jules described him. In her stories, he was whale-sized, his presence so solid he was always there when Mona spent time with Jules. Most of the stories she heard in the salon were like krill, nourishing, interchangeable, and easily forgotten. She liked them simply because she needed them and they kept coming. Whales' ages were measured using their earwax, hardened plugs that could be inspected like tree trunks, she had read. They carried their age inside them like a stopper, and scientists sometimes took them out post-mortem. Mona didn't want to start over at a different salon. She was worried she would lose her sense of time if her workplace was modern and polished. She was afraid she would wake up one day and have no idea where she was in relation to her parents' deaths or her future one or anyone else's. I'll stop there. Thank you.
That was wonderful, Naima. Great job. I am introducing Jillian. Jillian Fantin is a poet from Dallas, Texas. They graduated from Samford University with a BA in English and Political Science in 2020, and their work has been published in Wide Angle and the American Journal of Poetry and is forthcoming in Timber and Sprung Formal. Influenced by Marilyn Hacker, C.A. Conrad, Bob Dylan, and David Bowie, Jillian's work is marked by a strategic decadence that resists utilitarian language and narrative, by speakers who are alternately witty, whimsical, and intimate, and by scene building that makes each poem not only a new play, but a new stage, though perhaps in the same theater. Through meticulous use of ekphrasis, their poems beckon us to question the architecture of our deepest American intellectual and cultural roots, handing us a kaleidoscope through which familiar settings, archetypes, and icons of pop culture take on nightmarish tones. Both bodily and scenic spaces become bloated with garish combinations of creatures and pastries, morphing into sites for an invasion of excess that halts the wheel of expected progress mid-spin. Capitalism, sexual violence, Western masculinity, and gender discrimination are threaded to their intellectual and cultural ancestors throughout Jillian's work. The ghosts of Greek mythology, Roman myths, Renaissance painters, and 18th century sea shanties haunt their lines. When absorbed in one of Jillian's poems, we're invited into a playful gaze that is ever shifting and adjusting itself to new circumstances, which always makes me feel like a deep sea fish coming up toward the light for the first time. A line which might be considered ars poetic in this sense comes from Finding Myself at the Farm. Jillian writes, now I'm staring into a handmade crystal, sun, a chandelier, but it's a girl wearing nothing at all but a steel cage, crinoline with aerial silk dancers dripping tent moths. Here, as in so many of Jillian's pieces, we think we see a body, but the body is fused with rough industrial material and winged harbingers of some other force that beats beneath the language, something deeply unsettling yet also delightful, something that has a fluttering life of its own. The violence of gender performativity and social performativity generally is ever present, but Jillian enacts an imagistic Frankensteining that reclaims agency over the body's presentation, both in the world and in text. In Time of the Month, the speaker says, together we could build a puppet theater. Instead, I replaced my gums with plums, my tongue with a banana slug. At such moments, this invasive, sticky sweet material teeters on monstrosity, but I'd argue that it also asks us to imagine the liberatory potential of getting into the muck of memory, myth, and late capitalist horror, then coming out on the other side to construct our own bodies anew, if only in imagination and on the page.
Thank you so much, Mary. I'm so lucky to be in this cohort and with this group of such talented writers. I'm blown away. Before I begin, though, I want to start with a quick land acknowledgement. I drafted, edited, and compiled the poems for this reading on the land of Indigenous peoples, including the land of the Miami Nation, the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and the Peoria, all of whom continue to thrive, create, and educate today. So I'm going to begin with my poem, Snuff Film. Starring Madonna's Golden Canine, a battle axe shaped like Sharon Stone, and ball top hangers. Nowadays, we're so tasteful, so classy, nothing really happens. Just baldness and syphilis. It's all the rage now, like tipping queens with bags of hair, or fishing for showgirls with sour Skittles. This audience likes to know what happened to Mae West's bangs more than they'd like to watch stretch marks carve dollhouses, buzzsaws leave hickeys on bone, the last temptation of Sylvia Scarlett. Spoiler alert, it was me, tag-teaming Godzilla with Cher's abs. Credits roll, just before we got to find out what was living under powdered wigs. Ah, now everyone's missing the naughties. That is, plucking eyebrows to 3 hairs, cotton candy crematoriums, rhinoplasty erotica, vocal fry. Bring me some ketchup, will you? I think I'm starting to miss us, animal style. This next piece is called To Be Rollickin' Randy Dandy-O, and the title and the repeating phrase in the poem come from the 18th century sea shanty, Randy Dandy-O. My brother's favorite number is 6. When you count in binary, it looks like a peace sign. Someone pushed him off his playhouse to see how he would feel. Way, hey, roll, and go, say the fops and dandies and manta ray mainstays, the ones who live in Fujifilm, cardboard cutouts, shanties carved by the millions into maritime Meniski, as the John B. sails away. Way, hey, roll, and go, bobbles up, tinkles like plastic pearls against the dash, making his way to senior year sing of joyous voyage, a sailor's prerogative or mass rewinds of basic instinct, rippling static in waves again and again and again for basement glances upskirting Catherine Trammell. Way, hey, roll, and go, said Captain Kirk to Mr. Spock. But Tomlinson still dies fighting Romulans. Caligula has conquered conch shells, and stars still shine like stars. This next piece is called Eileen Warnos. Eileen Warnos. Fucks the full moon, Johns, Janes, Jack, Jills and Jackoffs, anyone kissing the points of railroad spikes. Hookers her bitten nails into thinly freckled forearms to sample dark-washed denim and butterscotch pudding cups. Learns she lived in Camelot and shoots a chipped cue ball at Jackie's Halston, shatters the bartender's television. Wails in Carney, gooble gobble gobble gooble. Collects Woodsy the owl stickers, peeling them from the fishnet trash bins, weaves her flea wheat braids with tick seed, tells the customers not to feed the toeless carrier pigeons. Reads her star chart. A Pisces sun, rising Gemini, the moon-nighted, compassionate, hard-working, dedicated, and reliable, but a swamp-stuck, dried toothpaste in the folds of the tube, and in her sunken ship dimples, and in a greasy sink stuffed with Scritta paper. Offers $20, $20 to anyone who can spell my name right the first time. This next piece is called Don't Pay Me. It's dedicated to the late actor River Phoenix, and it incorporates some lines from his opening monologue from My Own Private Idaho. No road looks just like every night that I'm falling asleep on a couch, waking in my own bed, thinking of, have I been here before? In his watermelon eyes seeping seed bullets, kissing his salmon pink simper packed with other people's teeth. There's no other road, no other roads, just this road, where names tire burn, marigolds traffic toss, mourn their lost rabbit. I just know I've been here before, where roads macrame a new way home. The gaps in your name make another fucked up face, spitting canary Stratocasters. Mail call, free of charge. You're kick flipping on my temporal lobe, but I never make you sweep the leaves. Go back, love over fire pits, running. There's and a hair thrice smashed. Sometimes you forget you are driving till it makes itself milkshake roadkill. No road looks at you like this one. This next piece is called I Love You Like the Cheesecake Factory. It was my first submission to workshop and it has been edited many times. Frenetic aesthetics. Iggy Pop fucking a harmonica with the Sphinx Eiffel towering them both. We all deserve overpriced cheesecake in this Gene Roddenberry fever dream. I love you, a mismatched wish for multi-ethnics in restaurantus chainus suburbius. I love you, oak arm, cloth napkins, books with bandaged curves. I love you, beige, Greek optatives and a gastric bypass. We smell like the Train Spotting soundtrack. Paying tabs with wet cash, playing tabs with broken picks, praying trams won't rush past, singing in the key of proactive vending machines. We'll take the free valet, tip $1 in nickels, yeah. I love you blank, like how breathless Mahoney loves. Gargling the air released in a frog's croak, pockets stuffed with bread. We kiss to the groan of the Republican National Convention. This piece is called I Never Wore Bell-Bottoms. There are lyrics from David Bowie's Ashes to Ashes sprinkled throughout, and the title comes from Bowie's answer to the Proust interview question, what is one thing you regret most in life? I never wore bell-bottoms. At least not enough. Surplus military, denim PFD. Engagements rain, table sugar the coasts. Waterlogged wives sink, princess cuts swallowed whole by starving lionfish. While a widow in a whisper of a wig sprouts a stomach from her sternum. Ashes to ashes, tanks in tank tops, Sailor Jerry inks the jukebox. Shanties to his clipper, stuffed with shaven seamen, meant for full heads, heads full of yarn, granny square vest yarn, recrocheted yarn, yarn unraveled from mama's magic carpet. Navy men hate flying, so mama's done with sailors. She takes tablets with margarine now, done with the shellbacks, their sunrise whistles, such an early song. Still, a recruit sings, swabs, rolls up his jeans, sweater, kisses his forearm, salty, with mama's pinup. I hope you're happy too. This piece is kind of ekphrasis. It was inspired by watching my good friend Maya, who's here tonight, reading Maya Angelou's poem, Phenomenal Woman. My best friend reading Phenomenal Woman. Wisteria hair, curls mossy full and strawberry starred, silver steel voice expanding like a name in Swiss meringue, egg stiff pipette peaks and longleaf bark. It's like you're extra human, earthbound newt swallowing sun-hungry raw to birth 5 daylights. She who holds 1,000 souls living as words in every heave of her chest. Rushing at attention across the block. Metal yard swans, granite, and purple queens rush in phalanx. She drinks their spears, guards them in the gaps of her gums, chafing razors, turning sliced frenulums into sweet mouth wine. Dripping like her curls, a congregation falls in her sunrise arms. She says tongue, and you remember yours pressing warm against your teeth. And this will be the last piece I read. It's called The Last Harpy. A man told me he wanted to fuck me, make me feel like a god or a son, to love until we split in two, until Aristophanes got heartburn, watching us hop all about with just one leg, one arm, one eye, half a nose. He said, "You have the face of a Greek god." I told him, "Be careful. Zeus might turn me into a grackle, then a constellation, then a story. I'll kill the bastard. Then he'd be a bear or a weasel or a turtle, and then we'd both just be stars, just be stories. He seems to like the chance to be a star. I like popping balloons with cake knives, auto harps, clams, and hula hoops. I want a Shelley Duvall biopic, ice cubes dunked in cream cheese, to teach the soot-covered canaries to read The State and Revolution, Ways to Unionize. A man told me, you have the face of a Greek god. He's never seen a Greek god. Thank you all so much.
I have the pleasure of introducing Phillip Spinella tonight. Now, Phil took an unusual path to the MFA. After a short diversion that included law school at Cornell and 6 years as an attorney, he finally came to his senses and ended up in the creative writing MFA program here at Notre Dame. And those of us who have had the pleasure of reading his material can all agree. We got lucky that we came at just the right time to catch Phil working on stories instead of contracts. Reading his work, you can see why he made for a good lawyer and why he makes for an even better writer. Between his keen, detail-oriented eye and his aesthetic mind, each moment of his writing becomes fully realized, each line meticulously crafted and enlightening, each paragraph intricate yet grounded. Whether he's rolling through philosophical musings or diving into vivid memories, it's impossible to avoid being immersed into the realities he constructs and articulates. Within his works, entire worlds play out in city streets, while whole universes are revealed through his characters' eyes. But what better endorsement could there be of his writing than the writing itself? So I'll do you all a favor and let you listen to Phil himself now.
Thanks, Ahmad. I like to think that's all correct. At least I'm a better writer than I was a lawyer. So, all right. So what I'm going to read tonight is a trimmed down excerpt from a section of my thesis project. The section is titled Koh Lipe, which is a very, very small island off the coast of Thailand. Okay. I ordered the pan-fried squid in black sauce. It came chopped, thick chunks of cupped tentacle, drowned in ink. When I was finished, nothing was left save a splotchy film of the black sauce pulled loosely on the white plate, like the negative of a cloud against a night sky. By the time my dinner was done, night had fallen completely, and I went to sit on the beach and pretend at contemplation while looking up at stars I had never seen before. But after several minutes, even stars can lose their luster, and I turned my attention to certain green semicircle shapes that shined against the pitch black expanse of sea sky. I was captivated by the lights, each of which flickered at irregular intervals, giving me the impression of phantom entities in communication with one another. Being exhausted and a bit unsettled, I decided to return to my room. My fingernails, I noticed when I lay down in bed to sleep, were ringed with the dried ink from my dinner, as if I had been digging in a dark section of the earth. The next morning, I woke up shortly after sunrise and took a walk down the beach. Past that stretch that is heavily lined with hotels, I saw a boat being hitched to one of the island's makeshift piers. The men on it created a line from the boat to the shore and passed nets, squirming with heavy cargo, one from the other to large coolers on the water's edge. I approached and made eye contact with the last man in line. His look was inscrutable. I turned away and looked into the cooler next to me. It was filled with fresh squid. The squid were still alive, and their movement gave the impression of dirty whitecaps about to break. Standing there watching the men's labor began to feel voyeuristic, so I walked back down the beach to my room and researched how the men had gone about their catch. It turns out they use large arrays of bright green lights to catch squid. The method is simple. The squid are tricked, lured upward by the green light, which is reflected and amplified by the tattered blanket of plankton that are similarly attracted and on which squid feed. Though viewed at a distance, it is undeniable that the practice in the aggregate is impressive, as is nearly anything that is visible from space. Feeling that this was very much a when in Rome situation, I returned to my hotel and reserved a spot on one of the ships going out that night. At least half a dozen of them are typically available for taking tourists out for an overnight experience difficult to get anywhere else in the world. That evening when I returned to the beach, the sun was halfway down and I found a half dozen tourists waiting near a boat upon which several men were moving about methodically, wrapping ropes around this and that, performing all the preparatory verbs to their corresponding objects, all those things I have no names for. In short order, we were led on board, and one uneventful hour later, we had finally lost sight of land. The deeper we traveled out to sea, the more the conversation, already shallow, faltered and finally fell away. After a few minutes of relative silence, with only the sound of the small motor in the water's lap against the hull to hold on to, the boat came to a stop. The green lights I had seen the night prior were nearer now, some so close I could make out, through the glare, the outline of a sister ship. And at that moment, in which I felt entirely out of place, the lights in our boat were switched on above me, and the water in front of me was transformed into an alien, irradiated shade of green. The noise of things stirring to life filled the boat and the sea around it. The guides handed out heavy wooden fishing rods and began chopping chunks of dead squid to hook onto our lures as chum. After waking the following day in the early afternoon, I left my room and walked around the island in somewhat of a stupor. Lacking motivation, I ate the same lunch I had the day prior and then wandered back to the beach. The afternoon sky was overcast and a storm was rolling in, and the sea appeared a dark greenish shade of blue. I imagined that from a certain height, far enough above the earth, the small tree-covered islands would look like algae-covered rocks that were being washed to land by a harsh tide. I stood there for a moment, thinking about my travels thus far, attempting to break down the stream into discrete parts to begin the long road to synthesis, but I could not concentrate. I could not shake the memory from the previous night's trip out to sea, The memory of the thrashing squid that had been tricked into feeding on its own, hooked, hauled in, tossed onto a wooden table, and then unceremoniously dispatched. How one of its thick tentacles had been immediately severed, sliced thin, and left to briefly cook in a large bowl that contained an acid bath of salt and lime juice. We had then set out for the beach, and in due course the sun began to rise behind us. The light allowed for the guides to conduct a brief inspection, whereupon they informed us that the catch had cooked enough to eat. While much else about my travels has already begun to fade, I can recall with clarity how the squid had dissolved on my tongue as I watched those still alive writhing in the vats that would hold them on their trip back to land. Thank you.
Thank you all so very much. Now we are going to kind of open the floor up for any questions that people might have for the readers. You can either unmute and say your question, or you can put it in the chat and we can ask it that way. Austin?
I have a question for you. I would love to hear you talk about sort of the uses of anger in your writing.
Oh man, that is a really hard thing. I think honestly, I've been working on perfecting it, and I think it came from, I recently watched one of those brief productions of David Bowie's musical Lazarus, and the Valentine's Day sequence where there's just tons of black balloons falling on the ground and they're popping everywhere as Valentine's Day plays on and like he's singing. It's just amazing. And that to me is how I've been working on kind of putting like calculated rage and anger into my work. It's a lot of listening to David Bowie, honestly, and kind of also taking in the feelings that I do feel and channeling them into something productive. I think rage can do very well within poetry, and I like using it just because when it's placed carefully, it's kind of like salt, like just a little bit can enhance everything else. So that's kind of, I hope that answers. I was a little all over the place.
First of all, beautiful readings. I actually have a question for Mary, although it could also be opened to, I believe, Phillip and Jillian, or anyone actually. But Mary in particular, because several of your works were inspired by pieces of art, and I was just curious, were those pieces inspired just sort of when you first saw them, or did it take a long moment of meditation with the piece, like multiple days or hours with that piece and just sort of ruminating, or was it a very spontaneous in the moment as soon as you saw inspiration?
So that piece in particular was inspired by the story of Pope Joan. Actually, what happened was over the quarantine, I was staying at my uncle's house in Brooklyn, and one of the only books that I had with me was this translation that Lawrence Durrell did of a Greek book called Papissa Joanna. And it's this kind of like historical fiction. It's kind of funny, but it's about this legendary woman pope who apparently was not discovered to be a woman until she gave birth in the middle of a procession. And then after that, as I guess the official record says, she was either murdered or just died. So then I started looking around on Artstore, which is like the art component of JSTOR. If nobody knows about this, it's a real treasure trove for artistic representations of that. And then I just kind of like, I guess it was maybe like since it was a long poem, it was like a few days of just like sitting with each piece and just kind of allowing my thoughts to kind of roam and play out as they would. Thank you for that question.
I do have a fair amount of art in the other stuff. Like I had pictures in here, and some I take and some I just find after the fact. My process is usually a little, I think, the opposite maybe of what Mary just said, because kind of like I'll see a piece that I like love. I just trust my gut at this point. I see a piece that I really find compelling, and then I'll go back and like do the research and see if there's a story there. So I don't know if that's the opposite of what you just said, but that's the way I usually go about it.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question of the prose writers? because this is actually something I wonder about myself. I kind of feel your pain the way you're both talking about how you kind of envy poets, where in these group readings where, a poet, if they want to give if somebody asked them to give a 30-second reading, they could probably do it, but it's a lot harder when you work in prose. But I was struck by how the works that both of you read today sort of lend themselves to thinking in terms of stanzas, like Naima's piece. I'm always kind of like really admire the way that Naima, you'll kind of it seems like a new story is going to start every paragraph. There's like a hook. First, a guy lands in a cactus, and then the next thing somebody's talking in binary, and it's almost like these things can sort of lend themselves to thinking in terms of like a book-length poem, a cycle of stanzas. And so I guess it's a long-winded way of asking, do you think of it that way? Do you ever kind of think of these as sort of like linked flash fictions, I guess? Or, how do you know when you have the whole, or it's just kind of open-ended wondering. I wonder if you have an answer to any of that.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I don't know. I guess I don't know if I would say that I think in terms of stanzas necessarily, or like, I guess not like officially poetically, but I would say that what I do is like I have a little notebook and I'll gather like lines or phrases that I like, or images, like the astronaut landing in a cactus. I watched a piece of footage once where I think it was just a parachute like diver who had like landed in a cactus, and I was like, this is great. So it's like I didn't even make that up, like it just happened to me. So either like images or like lines will come to me, and then a lot of the time in my writing process, I think I do I'll have like 2 or 3 or 4 things, and I'll just see how I can link them. So I don't know if that's necessarily poetic as much as just like, I almost think of it as like a collage. And so I'll have like little images that ideas that I guess I'll try to link that way. I don't know if that answers the question, but I guess that's kind of how I approach it.
Yeah, totally. I like that idea of collage.
Yeah, I kind of, sorry, yeah, interrupt. I kind of start with images too. Like part of my thesis is, a lot of the people here know, is autofiction-ish. Like, so I was there in Columbia, and these lights were just kind of crazy, and so I had to look into them. But like I never went out on the boat. I just I missed the opportunity to do that, and so I had to just like look into that. But like I just try to run with an image. This was actually a very useful exercise, this having to read, because I've never done this, but this section, Colipe, was a lot longer. There's a lot of other stuff that goes on, but I had to try to like trim it down, I think, to something that the core of it, like there's extraneous stuff that I think is oftentimes, the digressions are oftentimes my favorite part, but having to read to other people kind of helps me figure out what the core line is. And I guess that's something I'll have to do probably with all my writing, I guess.
Anybody else have any questions? Oh, I see a hand up. Mary? Awesome. Unmute and say your question.
Hi, I'm Mary. I actually have a question for you, Jillian. Your poem about the Cheesecake Factory made me laugh. I was just curious, like, what inspired that? Because I just thought that was hilarious. The part of where you made the suburbanist, or you made it sound like Latin or whatever, I really liked that.
I think it's because, I just remember being at university, and the Cheesecake Factory was kind of like the mecca for the students in a way. Like everyone would kind of go to that at a certain period of time, and it's where like all the dates happen, major finals exam cramming would like happen. It was just this very interesting place. And so I think I don't remember I was reading a collection of like collected works from multiple different authors, and the idea of love kept coming in, and I said, well, what do I love like? And I said, maybe I love like the Cheesecake Factory. And I just thought, what might that mean? Like, it's all this fatty desserts and cheesecake, and if you go in, there's these weird like columns, like all these different kind of column styles. There's sometimes I saw like a sarcophagus in one, and it's just this weird mismatch, like the restaurant chain is Suburbius. And like, I just think that humor and poetry is when it's just such a fun thing to add, and it can still have meaning. So I just wanted to see what loving like the Cheesecake Factory meant. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. It's just because like the Cheesecake Factory is exactly that. It's like this the suburban thing of restaurants. Like I'm from the Midwest, and so I just when you were reading that, I was just laughing because it like hit so true when it came to emotional resonance of that type of stuff. So yeah, and it seems to me that your humor and or how you were talking about like how you can put anger in like a little bit of salt, or like humor and like a little bit of salt, I guess, as well. Like that can really add to the thing. So, and everyone's stuff was awesome. I really enjoyed it. So thanks.
Thank you, Mary. Misael, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I guess I also have a question for the fiction writers, and just because I think Naima's pieces struck me as very poetic because of the D alliteration. It's like the D is driving the piece, but I was wondering if Phillip can also like mention how he includes some sonic elements into his own work.
Yeah, thank you, Misael. I don't know if I necessarily start out with thinking about the sonic element, although I think I do lean maybe too heavily sometimes on alliteration. But I think once I have like a draft, I will go through and read it either out loud in my head, and think about what it sounds like. I think maybe differently from how poets do it, but still with some kind of an ear for that. I don't think I always did this, but my long-term partner is a musician, so I think as long as I've been like around, like, or for the past like I don't know 4 or 5 years, I've been listening to more music and rhythm more closely maybe, and so there's something about that that's been like driving my writing process. I think that's something I can't even really put it, I can't even explain it, but if I have like a paragraph or something that I'm working on, it has to sound right, and so there's something about like the feel of it. So thank you for picking up on that.
Yeah, when I was an attorney and I didn't have time to write fiction, just my creative outlet was writing poetry. Not that anyone in this program is going to see any of it, but so like the sound and the prosody of poetry and of writing, and or at least the way I liked to do it for myself, kind of translates, I guess, a little bit into how I write fiction as well. I don't make too much of an effort. Some of it just comes out that way, but I guess I don't often move on fast enough, because for me, probably to my detriment, maybe the thing I care about the most is like that a sentence sounds good, and that's not really conducive to like getting a lot of pages written, which I'm learning now. But like I like the sounds of a well-written sentence, and so I strive. I like very much strive for it. So it takes an effort after the first lap.
Awesome, Mary, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I actually have a quick question for Phillip. I was wondering if you have read Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential. I was thinking about it a lot because he writes obviously so much about food, and he has the Parts Unknown series with food and travel, but just the visceral butchering of the squid and the journey of that from that kind of slaughter to the plate. Like he writes about the brutality of food and restaurants in a really cool way, and I wondered, I mean, perhaps it's a recommendation if you haven't read it, but it made me think of his work.
Yeah, I never read it, but I will. If that, I honestly, encephalopods, is that what they're called? Like I try not to eat them anymore because it's tough. But like when I was eating I didn't go out on the boat, so I didn't see that, although it does happen. When I was eating the plate of squid when I arrived there, I just saw it, and for the first time it like truly landed how like visceral it is, especially that animal, for me anyway. And so as soon as that happened, all this violence kind of came home to roost. And some of that language in here, I tried to capture just that like emotional response with images. And so like, if it seems violent, it's because it was meant to be. But I will check out Anthony Bourdain's Kitchen Confidential because I hear it's great.
Thank you all. We probably have time. If anyone has like one more question, feel free to ask it. I'm just gonna check to see if anybody's hand is up real quick. Yeah, otherwise we can call it a night. Thank you everyone for coming out and listening to all us writers. And we hope you all have a very good and safe night. And yeah, stay safe. All right. Bye everybody.